The Lester's Grill, Carolina Hotel. Jim's lunch for hot dogs, we'll eat our fill. Sam and Max shoe shine, I'll pick up the bill. California sandwich shop, we'll find our thrill. Down on Hamburger Square, Hamburger Square. Some of my favorite people down there. Down on Hamburger Square, Hamburger Square. Sam and Max and little Esther's down there. Got something can't be taken away. The power of love, baby, what I say. Max Corner Grill got the mystery mounds. It's Blumenthal's and you know you're downtown. Down on Hamburger Square, Hamburger Square. Some of my favorite people down there. Down on Hamburger Square, Hamburger Square. Sam and Max and little Esther's down there.
Hello and welcome to our program Conversations. We have with us today Dennis Quaintance, owner of the Lucky 32, Printworks Bistro, Green Valley Grill, Hotels Proximity, O. Henry, which make up Quaintance Weaver Hotels and Restaurants. He's the recipient of the 2025 Stanley Frank Economic Workforce Development Award. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Did I miss anything?
Oh, well, my bride's amazing, and our wonderful now 27-year-old twins are incredible. So you missed that, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, tell me about growing up. First of all, for you, and you were born in Sprint Lake, Iowa.
Yeah, Spirit.
Spirit Lake, Iowa.
Yeah.
I'm misspelling.
Yeah. Well, my dad drove race cars, so maybe he won a sprint race, and that sort of polluted the thinking. But yeah, I was born in Spirit Lake, Iowa, and when I was just between first and second grade, my dad had gone out to support my grandfather, and my uncle, who had homesteaded. You could still homestead in the early 60s in Nevada. And so he had rebuilt a tractor and a little cat to take out there, and decided to stay. He got a job as a foreman of this really, well, it was a large geographic ranch, but it was in the middle of nowhere. So we moved to central Nevada, and we were literally 112 miles from Tonopah. And Tonopah is where they developed the stealth fighter. And they said they developed the stealth fighter in the middle of nowhere. So I grew up 112 miles from the middle of nowhere. And so anyway, we lived there for about a year and a half, I guess. And then my dad got in the business of transporting, catching, there's still a wild population as there was then of Mustangs. And so you could catch them, legally. And so they'd run up in these box canyons and catch them, and then sell them as rodeo stock. So that's how we ended up in Montana, is that my dad, the rodeo stock at that era, there was a real sort of hub for it in western Montana. And so that's how we ended up in Montana. So that's where I lived most of my early life, was in the Bitterroot Valley of Montana.
And you participated in the ranch and all that stuff.
Well, back then in second grade, this is really pretty funny, but it was a wonderful adventure. I mean, we didn't get any radio stations, no TV. Our phone, there was one phone in this whole little village. I went to a one-room school without running water or electricity, and our phone number was Current 3 Ely Exchange. So you had to call, ask for the Ely, Nevada Exchange, and say Current 3. And it was a crank phone. I mean, we were in the middle of nowhere. In fact, someone found a pack of matches from that era on eBay and sent them to me recently. And it's so funny, all it says, because there's a little cafe and bar there, serve 6 people a night or something, but other than the ranch hands. And it just said, Current Ranch Motel and Restaurant and Bar. No phone number, no address, no nothing, because we didn't have any of that. It's just, if you were in Current, that's where you were. So yeah, it was really a wonderful adventure.
I was going to say, it sounds like a great place to grow up as a kid.
Oh yeah, it's incredible. The school bus. In fact, there's some wonderful oral history things that they put together with the lady that had been with a number of people in Nevada, because it's really, you're really out in the middle of nowhere in a lot of these areas, high desert stuff, and so I was able to find this oral history thing on the internet a couple of years ago with the person that had been our teacher, grades 1 through 8 in this one school. There was between, I think that the most students we had was 16, and then sometimes it was down to 8. So I was the only second grader, but there was one first grader, and his name was Dennis, and I was larger than him. So for 1 year of my life, I was Big Dennis. And so it was a wonderful thing in terms of participating in the ranch. I not a whole lot. I mean, yes, I would, like when something would break, we had our own shop and everything, and I at that age I learned how to do, the valves on. I would do mechanical stuff. I would grind the valves, reseat them. I was just thrown right in the middle of it. I realize now that it was sort of a Montessori childhood, because they just, I just jumped in and did stuff that I didn't know I wasn't supposed to be able to do at that age. It was a great experience.
I was going to say, this must have paid dividends over the years, you learning, mechanics and all that stuff.
I think one of the great advantages, that's right. I mean, I think that the ingenuity comes out of necessity. And so you take away the necessity, you take away the ingenuity. But ingenuity sort of is its own reward. I was literally trained that you can do anything, don't let, if you're having trouble calving, there's not a vet for 2 hours. You got to figure out, you're either going to lose the cow and the calf, or you're going to, you're going to figure it out. Call some, back then you didn't have the phones, but, call on somebody to come help you. And so, yeah, it was a good experience. Now, we weren't in the cattle business. We grew alfalfa, but I just brought that up as an illustrated example. But what I do enjoy saying is that there's this old miner, a prospector, that was there, and I realize now he was an alcoholic. He's just would sit there, and he was sort of ran the little 2-pump gas station, and we'd have maybe 6 cars a day or whatever. But he said, he taught me how to go out and find interesting rocks like iron pyrite and that kind of stuff, and there was this sedimentary rock that just looked gray. But when it was wet, it was beautiful, like rainbow colors in it. It's really beautiful. He said, so what you need to do is when you see a car coming, which you could see for about 15 minutes before they got there, he said, hose off your rock stand. And when people say, what's that beautiful multicolored rock, just tell them it's called Nevada Wonderstone. And because when it dries off, they'll wonder why they bought it. So anyway, I learned how capitalism works. I don't like that particular form of it, but I think that's a fun story.
It sounds like an infomercial, though.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Call in the next 15 minutes.
Right, yeah.
But so you learned a lot about business very, very quickly. Your mom owned a 6-room motel?
Well, no, it was, she didn't own it. She managed it.
Managed it, I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. That's right. That was right there in yeah. I mean, what I think about business is that, it isn't all that complicated. That if someone's going to swap you money for something, then if you're going to want to be around for a while, make sure that they sort of feel like they get more than they give. I mean, that's sort of the basic rule. And then once you have that sort of where, you're really literally, providing a value to somebody, then figure out how to have more income than outgo. And so, from my perspective, you really do need to understand finance and how like bookkeeping and how do you define a profit? It's not as simple as cash in, cash out is really not a profit, because you got to capitalize the major capital expenses and then amortize them. So you've got to figure out how, there's a lot of stuff like that you need to learn, but that's relatively easy. The core, in my mind, of business is what I've already mentioned, is providing something that people want at a price that they're comfortable paying, and then making sure that your costs associated with delivering that are lower than the amount of revenue you come in. Remember that Janice Ian song, when accounts, what is it? But anyway, one of her songs, she even says that. So maybe I learned about capitalism from all people from Janice Ian.
Hearing the way you talk, I was just thinking, like, we were talking before the program about, the modernization. And do you think that, like, the way you were talking about, cash in, cash out, do you think that's just been, like, the major focus in modern, business? Is that, like, that's all we think about is just cash in, cash out?
Well, yes, I do think there's, I'm not a social anthropologist, but I like to think like one. And I believe that I'm 68 now, and I've been sort of paying attention to stuff, for quite a while now. And what I think is that we've evolved from making decisions in business. I think we used to, let me start again. I think that it used to be that a lot of our business decisions were based on relationships. Like, if I'm going to build, a hotel or a restaurant, I want my neighbors to really be proud of this. I want this to be something that is sort of a part of the community. Look at the way the built environment worked up until, a few years after World War II. I mean, we used to, up until the early 60s, people that built a building, even if it was a multi-tenant building, really had a lot of pride in it. They wanted people to say, hey man, our city's better off because of what you've done here. That's what I believe happened. Again, I'm not, don't give me a lot of credit for this. This is my own observation. And I think we've evolved to one that we're more motivated as a society on the transactions. Like, man, you made a good deal. You bought this for X and you sold it for Y. You must be smart. And I think that's a negative trend. I think that being vested with the folk that live near us and don't live near us, the idea of being of service to those around us, and that being your sort of ego tie, is more positive for the evolution of society than being motivated by a fiscally profitable transaction. So, that's why our company's employee-owned now to a great extent, that we're able to move the ownership of the company to a trust that provides benefits for our staff members. And because I think that we ought to think about aligned interest and building community, not through, sort of Band-Aid sort of stuff, but through health sort of stuff. Let's cause us to have aligned interests. Let's be on the same team.
Health stuff. Tell me about it. So let's go into that. Let's jump ahead.
Well, in other words, now we sort of like, if something's not going well, rather than, going out and walking around the block and doing some push-ups and eating less Snickers bars. Someone gave me a Snickers bar the other day. I love them. And she said, Snickers will make you thicker. And I'm like, yeah, right. So now, rather than do that, we want to, say we, have some ailment. We very often, as a society, and I'm not cynical about this, I just sort of calling what I see, that we're more inclined to say, well, what's the prescription? What are you going to give me? As opposed to, what lifestyle changes can I make so I can reverse this? Is this reversible on my own? And when I've asked my doctors that, like about cholesterol years ago, they said, well, no one's ever successful at reversing their cholesterol, so you should really go on statins. Well, that was over 35 years ago, and I'm still not on statins. And because I started eating less white starches and I started walking more. And
What's statins?
oh, that's that, those cholesterol lowering drugs.
Okay.
Maybe I'm saying it wrong. I thought they're called statins. But anyway, I'm not on a cholesterol lowering drug but it isn't about me. It's but that's a story that relates to answering your question.
Let me jump back to that. So your doctor didn't recommend exercising and lowering your starches?
He said that, yeah, it's really funny. He said there's 3 different he's here. They're different doctors because they keep getting old and moving on. I shouldn't say that. Murphy may be watching. He's still alive. He's great. But anyway, he just said, yes, you can reverse this, but very few people are successful doing that. So, anyway, he may be, now that I think about it, he may have been playing a game with me saying, well, you can't do it, but then I did. I was able to lower my cholesterol through lifestyle stuff.
Good deal. Yeah, it's one of those, it's just one of those interesting things. It's one of these observations I have now is like, you watch commercials. I understood that like in the past couple of years, I understood like the news is not on your side, and here's why. If you look at who's funding the news, look at all the commercials. You got a Taco Bell, Wendy's, whatever, McDonald's. And then at the end of it, there's some kind of weight loss drug. Like, wait a minute. If you ignored those first 3, it's so we're kind of, I don't know, sometimes we're set up for failure.
Well, I do believe that, always follow the money. There's some things that are pretty constant. Gravity's really constant, and that money talks. And sometimes it yells.
Sometimes it yells. I like that.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. Okay, so can we go back to your the owner-operator system that you have? How did you come up with that?
Oh, I didn't. So our little company now, we have about 700 staff members, mostly all in Greensboro. We have a restaurant in Cary as well, Lucky 32 Southern Kitchen there, and one here, and other than that, it's the hotels and the restaurants associated with them. So there's 700 staff members in all those 6 businesses. And so what we did is there's a mechanism that's called a 401A. Everyone knows what a 401K is, but it's a retirement plan that is based on the value of the company. So you can sell the equity that you own in an operating company to a trust. It's called the Quaintance Weaver Employee Stock Ownership Trust, and from that, the trust actually owns the business, and not the real estate. There's still leased and that sort of stuff, but the operating businesses, and the people that work there gain participation value as a beneficiary of the trust just by working there. You don't ever put money into it as a staff member, but if you work there, say you were working with us and the total payroll for 1 year was $10,000 and you made $1,000, then you'd get 10% of what we call of the retirement units that would be released that year. Then the retirement units are released over a schedule. Usually it's 30 years, but you can speed it up. You can't slow it down from there. So the idea there is that you're not going to release too much of the equity of the company to one generation of your colleagues at the detriment of another generation. So there's a sort of an amortization schedule for how you release the participation units as the beneficiaries of the trust. So it's called employee ownership, and it should be called that because who owns it if the only beneficiaries of the company's ownership are the people that work there? But it really isn't. It's owned by a trust, and the people that work there are beneficiaries. I'm a participant in the trust, so every year, and it has all these wonderful mechanisms like to make sure that not too much of the participation units, they usually call it stock, but it really isn't stock. You're beneficiaries to a trust, as I mentioned. Don't go to the highly compensated people. It's really a well-designed thing. It was invented by this man named Louis Kelso back in the late 50s because he observed, an interesting guy, grew up on a ranch in Colorado, and just sort of this thoughtful person, and must have been pretty bright. But he observed that that the earning power of capital was outpacing the increases in the earning power of labor, of work. And so he said, oh my gosh, we're going to have a concentration of wealth. And this is in the 50s. And if you just look at the numbers now, we've had a concentration of wealth. And so he was ahead of his time. So he said, how can we sort of monetize the future value of capital and that kind of stuff? So he set up, there was a newspaper company in California that wanted to sell to their employees because they didn't want to lose the culture and the sort of editorial perspective of the newspaper. But they couldn't figure out how to do it without the employees being at risk. If it didn't go well, they might lose their house, because they'd have to borrow money. So he had this idea that they already had a pension plan. So he literally went back to Washington, D.C. and met with the head of the IRS and said, hey, would you allow us to do sort of an experiment? Would you allow us to have the pension own just one asset, and that's this company? And so all of the benefits, all of the contributions to this pension plan will focus on buying stock in this company over a number of years, and then that'll be owned by a trust, and the employees will be the only people that can be beneficiaries of that trust. And the IRS guy said, yeah, this sounds like a good experiment. So it took from the late 50s until 74 when they actually sort of they put it into the ERISA bill, the Employee Retirement Security Act, something like that. I think I'm missing a word in there, in 1974. But there were several ESOPs that happened, but they were all one-offs that had to be negotiated with the IRS independently. And in the early generation of ESOPs, there was some flaws in the way it was written. It's not as well done. And there's more than one sort of ESOP, employee stock ownership plan. There's a, not to get too technical, but there's a subchapter S ESOP, which is 100%, well, it doesn't have to be 100%, but there's different, a C Corp, an organization that's owned by a C corporation has different tax treatment than one that's an S corporation, which is a pass-through entity. So, like I mentioned, you've got to gain an understanding of these sorts of ideas, but we're 100% S Corp ESOP, so 100% of the business is owned by this trust. And so it's a really cool thing because, I mentioned earlier that communities really happen around aligned interest. So now we have aligned interest. It used to be if we had a really good year, the owners of the company benefited and the staff, had a good job, fine, whatever. But now we have a really good year and they benefit. All of us do that work there. If we have a really bad year, we all sort of feel the pain together. So when the pandemic came along, the value of the trust went down by 95% because we had to close our businesses. We were shut down. So, someone that had $3,000, say, in their account, it went down to $300. And but then we rebuilt it over a period of years, and it's back past where it was then. Mm-hmm. So we're eating out of the same feed bucket. That's community.
Wow. Now, how did you learn about this?
It's interesting. I think, you talked about the, like growing up on a ranch and that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. There's a sort of an ingenuity thing that kind of comes with that, is that if you hear about something, then you want to learn more. And it's all out there now. I mean, with the internet and books before that and still books. So I always wanted. He unfortunately retired recently, but I have this wonderful friend who is our attorney, Cy Johnson, and he and I used to talk about, what are some mechanisms that can bring to life further our ideas about further aligning the ownership of the company with a line level person, someone that's a housekeeper or a line cook. How can we all be on the same page? And he kept bringing up this idea of looking into employee stock ownership plans. So we did this. We converted the ownership of the company in 2016. My good friend and partner Mike Weaver was with me 100% of the way. We were 50-50 partners. Now we don't own the operating companies. It's owned by this trust. And so Mike loved these ideas as well, just to be clear about that part of it. But Cy and put together a group of people, some people that were leading ESOP-owned companies and some people that were advisors in 2004, I think it was. And we got a 26-page study about this. So we have a long gestation period. I mean, we studied employee stock ownership plans for, sort of formally for over 12 years before we actually did it. So you learn about it slowly. And you learn from other people's experiences and sort of call them up and say, okay, what's bad, what's good, how does this really work out? And so we just took our time, and then once we felt like we understood it well enough, we did it.
That's fascinating. So it just seems to me like you're always looking, like you're always looking at everything that's going on and trying to see what works.
We had a conversation earlier. We should tell everyone. So
yeah.
this sort of fits into what I was talking about then. What we were talking about then. That what I believe is that all we really own are the moments we happen to be in. It's our consciousness. I'm here now. This is what I've got. I can remember this tomorrow. I could have anticipated it yesterday, but this is when you're here. So my idea is that this sort of gift of consciousness is lightning fast. I mean, it happens. I mean, I can transport myself, and as you can too, to riding a bicycle, eating an ice cream cone when you're 6 years old, that sort of stuff. Your consciousness can move around. That everything is just what we remember, or what means something to us are the moments of consciousness that are particularly poignant, happy, sad, impactful, and all that. So having that sort of a mindset causes you to want to harvest whatever happens to be around you. So when we notice something that we don't fully understand, I just think it's too much fun. It's sort of a waste of our consciousness to sort of push it aside and say, well, that's not my expertise or whatever. My good friend Janetta Cole, Dr. Janetta B. Cole, that used to lead Bennett College here, says that we're living in the era of the tyranny of the specialist. So I choose to employ my consciousness. I don't think I'm any better or any worse than anyone else, but I choose to employ my consciousness in an enthusiastic, adventure, curious way. If you were able to cut out the sort of curiosity lobe of my being, I would say just take all of me, because curiosity is just too damn much fun. That's really one of the unique things about getting to be this species. So yes, I'm curious, and maybe curious in more ways than one, But the idea is that dance to the beat of your own drummer, man, and it's just fun to be out there and say, okay, how can we, like for instance with this employee stock ownership thing, we didn't invent it, but there's only like less than 150, I think, 100% S Corp ESOPs. They're very different than, there's all kinds of different ESOP mechanisms, but this is the 100% owned S Corp ESOP, I could get into more details about that. There's only 130 or less than 150, as I understand it, in North Carolina that are based in North Carolina. And there's only like, I forget what it is, but I think it's a little over 2% of people employed in the private sector that are employed by ESOP companies.
Why isn't this more popular?
Well, I think that there's a few reasons, I think, for that. One is that a lot of us that come along, not maybe unjustifiably, are skeptical of having the government involved because it's a government-regulated sort of entity. It reminds me, I can give a sort of parallel question. A lot of people don't participate in historic tax credits when they're doing a historic restoration because they don't want the government telling them what to do. Well, I'm not really worried about the government telling you what to do as long as you study what they're going to tell you what to do and you can predict it. So I believe that the best partner you can imagine in any part of your life is a partner where you can predict how they're going to act. You know, unpredictability is unsettling. Well, if you look at the way we're structured with 100% ESOP, our partners at some level are obviously all of our colleagues, but at another level, it's the Department of Labor and the IRS. Well, you can predict how the IRS and the Department of Labor are going to act. If you don't follow the rules, they're going to come in and they're going to win whatever argument they have with you. So don't not follow the rules. Always follow the rules. And so we do. We're very careful to make sure we do everything just right. So I think a lot of people don't do it because they don't want that people coming in and telling them what to do. But I'm like, hold it, if you can predict what they're going to do, what's the problem? And you're okay with that, then what's the problem with that?
We have a history of that in this country, we're afraid of the government telling us what to do. I mean, when we started, we were afraid of England telling us what to do.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
even forming the colonies, we did not want, particularly, I think it was South Carolina was one of the most stubborn ones they didn't want to form a United States. They wanted to all be their own.
Yeah, they want to be ununited states.
Yeah, they wanted to be the ununited states. But they're like, no, this is the only way the economy is going to work. This is the only way we're going to be able to take on England is if we're all together.
Yeah.
And so everybody was afraid of that. You fast forward, 1913, I think it was when the federal bank was formed. We were afraid of that because we ran out of, there were several deficits in the economy before the federal bank was formed because farmers and everything, they'd all go to the bank at the same time, and the regional bank, the small banks would run out of money, the regional banks would run out of money. So we needed the federal bank, I should say, but we were afraid of that.
Yeah.
There's I'm sure there's other examples too, but those are the
Well, I think fear is okay. But stay rational. And study history. I spent for Saturday mornings, I bet for 10 or 15 years, I'd spend a couple hours studying lawsuits relating to employee stock ownership plans. So I was like, okay, that's their mechanism for fixing something. They sue. They sue. And so I studied all these lawsuits, and I said, well, let's not do anything that's going to get you in a lawsuit with them. And so that's one thing. But relative to your thing about being skeptical about government and all that, well, I'd like to, the way I look at it is that working together in groups and having a sort of a collective, government for the people, by the people, is a really new experiment. It's about 3.5 minutes old. We just tend to think about things in terms of human lifetimes. And because it's been 250 years, since this sort of form of government sort of come along, transitioning between, we all know all about what happened before that, that we think that we've sort of got it figured out, that it's got to be this, you got to have these people saying, no, you're an idiot, no, you're an idiot, no, you said it first, he hit me first, all this kind of stuff. We think that that's sort of the highest form. And I'm not sure how it will evolve, but I think we should be cognizant that this is brand new. I mean, it sounds old because, not many people live more than 100 years, and our sort of, prime sort of influence is about 50, 60 years, right? So that's a pretty short period of time. So this is my opinion, we tend to think that the long term is, like 100 years or something. But the long term, I hope, is thousands of years. Let's sort of occupy this planet in a sustainable way, in the way we look after and are careful about our brothers and sisters socially, and in the physical environment. Let's see if we can, set things up so we have a sort of a potential for evolving in a positive way towards higher and higher levels of what I would like to refer to as fairness. The things ought to be fair. Mm-hmm. And so when we say we're skeptical about the government, I think because the government's screwed up a lot. I mean, look what even like the way that Assad was running Syria recently. I mean, my goodness, that was pretty rude. Not just you disagree with me, or mark up my poster and I'm going to have you killed. That's not a very good government, right? So I just think we ought to realize that we're sort of in the wilderness here, and we're wildly influenced compared to any other generation. We're influenced by the stuff that pops up on our phones, by what our neighbors say, and so I just think it's really important for us to all realize that we're being influenced, and we ought to decide, how we want to experience ourselves and how we want others to experience us, and just sort of slow down and reduce it. I think that if you really took the innate motivations of a human being, you would always get back to words that are synonyms for these: love, compassion, and service. I think that's how we want to experience ourselves. We want to be of service to others. We want to be loving and lovable, and we want to feel understood and appreciated. And so those three words can kind of fit those in there. So when you think about how we get all bound up about this policy and all that, there's nothing innately wrong with that. But I think we're well served to look at things in a historic context. And realize that we're really young in evolving how we're going to work together in these sort of macro, mega things where entities like a government that has, what do we have, 360 million people in America. We have a tremendous economy. We have 5% of the Earth's population, but 25% of its economy. Wow, how is that going to be sustainable? Those are the sorts of things that I think are really fun to think about. And are we treating our sisters and brothers fairly? We should be objective about that. Not. I'd like to say that ideology is maybe idiotology. We ought to. I think we're well served. How are you getting me to talk about this? You're just shutting up. That's a pretty good idea, I guess. But the idea is that I believe is that we're better served when we decide what our values are than deciding what sort of intellectual construct we're paying attention to by a bunch of people that are dead now and don't really know our current circumstances. And I believe that if we can evolve to where more of us are waking up thinking, how can I get to experience myself and others as being loving, compassionate, and of service, but remembering that can be sort of silly, because you got to include the without the patty cake baker's man too. If someone doesn't show up 3 days in a row, or every day when they come in they step on your foot, then you say, hey man, I don't want to play with you anymore. I mean, that doesn't, you're not of service to somebody. You might say, maybe we can set you up to go see a shrink because something wrong with you because you just come in here and step my damn foot every day, but you don't want to work with someone that comes in and steps on your foot every day. But you also don't want to work with somebody if you come in and step on their foot and they don't have the courage to say, you don't get to do that anymore.
we have really opened up something here. So, like, I was thinking as you were talking, the idea of...
You had plenty of time. I talked a long time.
No,
Sorry.
there's like so many points that I'm not going to be able to get to them all, unfortunately. But, the idea of service, community, and compassion, as far as the government is concerned, it's like great. Like, I think about the idea that I read this great book by Tony Robbins, and it's Money Master the Game. And this was after my wife and I, we went through the Dave Ramsey program. We paid off all our debt, or all our student loans anyway.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, well, what else is out there, right? It's this giant book. And I read this one section, and it had all these plans and everything. One of them talked about the Roth IRA. And this guy, William Roth, sponsored the bill in 1997, that it was meant for people who don't necessarily... I guess like want to participate in stocks or whatever, and it's a way for like the average person to gain an advantage, gain a retirement, or grow some money.
Yeah, create wealth.
Yeah, create wealth, and that's what you want, especially if you're when you get a little older, you have some health scares. So what a fantastic idea. I mean. And so I think about things like that as far as, someone in the government that was, looking out for us, and something that nobody really knows. I had to dig for all this stuff. I wish we knew about, more people knew about stuff like that. And even if you throw $100 in, maybe, a month, a year, that's better in 10 years than you were today.
Well, I love that Albert Einstein said the most powerful force in the universe is compound interest.
Compound interest, yeah.
Right. Because money's such a big deal. So if you look at what's gone on, and it's the thing that Lewis Kelso noticed back in the 50s, is that compound interest, in other words, when you invest and leave the money alone, it grows. It was outpowering or outgaining percentage-wise of this percent of the economy. There's more wealth being created by having money and investing it than there was going out and busting your can to build a ship or something. And so that's sort of a challenge. So what we've got set up now is that for most of us, compound interest, just to sort of use Einstein's joke, is working against us, the strongest force in the universe. Because we're advertising cars literally, not by how much they cost, but what the payments are. And those payments are always tied to the time value of money. What is it? What's the value of someone, having use of this dollar that I own for a year? So we would be really well served to cause more people to understand that if we can cause our financial resources to work for us rather than against us. So the idea of having less debt, figuring out how to have sort of smart debt that is leveraged towards something that is gaining in value as opposed to being depreciated in value, going down in value. Yeah. So there's I don't like the word financial literacy, but there's a financial wellness component that I think we'd be well served to understand at the next level. But you're right that someone like that works on these plans that encourage people to save money in a tax-advantaged way, in a qualified retirement plan. Yeah. It's really, really smart. It's impossible that anyone's going to retire and say, I wish I had less money in my...
right.
Because even if you have more than you need to spend to take care of yourself when you get old and your loved ones, or more than you want to give your family, then give it away to something that you feel strongly about. So, yeah, accumulating money is, but we ought to, I think that we're well served when we accumulate money to serve others and to, satisfy ourselves. But I don't think we're very satisfied with things. I think we're satisfied more innately with experiences. So.
And it's not necessarily, I think it's where you hit the nail on the head, it was where you can put your money.
Right.
Like you said, you can either, maybe take care of, maybe you can go on that trip that, you never you never took, or you go see that thing you never saw, or you felt really strongly about fighting childhood cancer or something. It
Right.
makes you feel good when you turn that over and
Right.
you have. And the other thing about it is one of the things I've observed is that we have sort of an issue with, we have like a conflict, I would say, in America with the rich, right? And well, what is rich, I guess?
Yeah.
And it's like we have this idea that like all rich people are bad. And we also, the other thing is we also mix up millionaires and billionaires.
Yeah. There's a big difference.
There's a big difference. Millionaires just, I think, is, is like the idea of just retiring okay.
Yeah, right.
And, you might live to 100, you might burn through it all, and that's just being okay.
Yeah.
I think, a billionaire is just someone who probably took more risk and, thought further than I did.
And to the extent of capitalism being a game, they were at the right place at the right time with the right idea and the right sort of motivations. So yeah, I mean, a lot of people became much richer than they intended or could ever imagine. And then they're just like the rest of us. They may not look like it or seem like it, but they're sort of hurt children like the rest of us and trying to figure out how to like measure up and be okay. And they have the sort of the same issues. I do think that the concentration of wealth and wealth inequities is a real problem, but I don't have a solution through policy. I hope that we'll evolve to what I refer to as sort of volunteer community thinking, where as you gain more and more wealth, and I think a lot of people are doing this, let's figure out that they're thinking, okay, I don't need this much money, neither do my heirs, so I will leave it to serve humanity in a way that I think is optimal. I think Warren Buffett is a good example of that. His wealth is extraordinarily high, but I think that, I don't remember the percentages now, but it's well less than 5% will actually go to his heirs. Most of it will go into charities. And capitalism, I think it sort of relates to what Churchill said about democracy. He said democracy is the worst form of government unless you compare it to the others. Well, capitalism is probably the worst economic system until you compare it to the others. It's really difficult. You're always going to have, winners and losers in the capitalist game. And if we just sort of try to handle it all with government policy, we may be able to figure that out, but I don't think we have yet.
Yeah, and it's one of those things.
But I wanted to say then, but if the wealthy figure out how to use their wealth, and like, for instance, creating a bunch of gated communities around the planet where the 1 billion rich people live, isn't really a sustainable model. We've got to figure out where there's, so I have a lot of observations for which I do not have solutions. I mean, almost all of them. I'm enthusiastic about noodling them and going for walks and chatting about what the possibilities are. But I want to be very clear that I do not believe I have answers. I think that I have questions. Yeah. And questions are more fun than answers.
Yeah, and I think we're all just trying to figure it out.
Yes.
It's like this, there's a kind of a debate right now, and I think it's been a debate for, I don't know, probably since the 50s, even before that, probably the last 100 years, is like this communism versus capitalism quarrel that we have. Yeah. And it's like, this goes back to the rich is bad thing and evil. I'm like, well, here's the issue. It's not necessarily that capitalism is bad or that communism is bad. It's that they all have the human element, that people have the capacity for being bad, for doing bad things.
Oh yeah, well,
for being greedy.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of a construct, and I think if you look at the evolution of the species, we've got to be careful because greedy was sort of, if you look at it, think about it, you sort of wanted to butt the other people away from the wildebeest as you're eating it, so you could get more. And you look at even the way that our bodies work with ketosis and all that, we would hoard, we'd take on too much protein and too much fat, and our body had to come up with ways to shed it. So there's metaphors for this in nature, even in our own bodies. But I do think that, that just continuing to be curious about what's kind of going on around us, and recognizing that we're not as mature in the evolution of these systems as we could be, as we will be, and it takes time, it takes experiment. But I really hope we come up with something where we have higher levels of aligned interest as a global community, that we see how we ought to, that we're all sort of sisters and brothers having to figure it out. But it reminds me of how when the Balkan Wars were raging, P.J. O'Rourke wrote this piece in the Rolling Stone that says, we have the unpronounceables fighting the unspellables, over which church, synagogue, or mosques they no longer attend. We're sort of fighting our grandparents' wars in a lot of ways. When you look at a lot of these conflicts around the world, even the economic conflicts. And so I mean, don't put me in charge. I do not know what to do. I just enjoy asking the questions and pondering them.
And it's thought-provoking.
Yeah.
I think that's the idea, is that that's what you're supposed to do.
Yeah, well, and you were talking about this conflict between communal communism. It's funny because it's just how you pronounce it. It brings you different sort of images of the, the sai and the sickle, and whatever it's called, hammer and sickle, and but with employee stock ownership, going back to that, there's this thing that I read quite a while ago that really kind of caught my attention. It said that employee stock ownership might be the only thing that Karl Marx, author of the Communist Manifesto, and Adam Smith, author of The Wealth of Nations, sort of the Capitalist Manifesto, would agree on. Because, do we have a group of people that we work with that are we communally owned? Yeah. Are we 500, but I say there's 700 staff members, about 400 of them are participants, because you got to be there 3 years to be fully vested and all that. So are we communally owned, and we're in the capitalist system, so are we 500 communal capitalists, or 500 capitalists that are communally owned? So you just sort of play with the words and you can get wherever you want to get, but the point is, that is a mechanism for aligned interest that I believe that our little company's 36 and a half years old now, and the way that Nancy and I and Mike Weaver and the people that that support me in my career think about it is we're relatively early in a longer experiment. This is we're 37 years into a small experiment, and but don't underestimate what small experiments can teach. Again, Margaret Mead, the cultural anthropologist, said, don't underestimate what a small group of dedicated people can accomplish, something like that. And then indeed, most every significant social change has come from a small group of dedicated people. So anyway, something like that. So my point is, we're not so arrogant to think we're going to change the world, but we're also not so silly to think that there's butterfly wing flaps all over the place that influence larger environments. Let's try to flap our wings in a way that changes things that might cause a higher level of economic and social fairness.
Do you read a lot when you're in your downtime? What are you doing in your downtime?
I think, yeah, I read a lot. I didn't used to read, though. I didn't come along. I didn't go to college. I thought I would maybe get to be a pilot, maybe an airplane mechanic, that kind of stuff. But I was fortunate enough to start reading in my 20s. And so, yes, I do believe I believe if you really want to see things the way they are, do two things: read and travel. Expose yourself to folk that have different experiences to you. And if you don't get to travel, then hang out with people that have different experiences than you've had. And that's how you sort of learn, because, you know, I believe that we sort of make it up. How do we want to make up, you know, like from a social construct, we've made up that, you know, these little button-down collar shirts are appropriate, and, you know, we made up that, you know, all this stuff, we're making it up. I mean, we can make it up differently, you know. Why do women wear more makeup than men? Why? We made it up that way, you know. So we just keep making up things. So recognize we're making it up, and then think about, well, how did we make it up that way? What are the drivers for the way we have it made up? And might we want to make it up differently? And by the way, I'm just here temporarily, so I better hurry, because you don't have a whole lot of time to consider it all. And oh, by the way, we don't want to like isolate ourselves. We want to be a part of society. We want people to enjoy being around us. So let's not run around. I just don't have an appetite personally for militancy. I have an appetite for, you know, for doing little experiments and being around people that where we have aligned interests, and we want to. We endeavor to understand and appreciate one another, and create community and love and fellowship and kinship. You know, I think that's sort of innate. So how I got to the perspectives that you're bringing out in me is, I think, just sort of not necessarily buying what's, you know,
being sold.
Yeah, I just don't think any of us have to dance to the beat of any drummer that we don't want to dance to. So, and I think I got to that just because of the variety of childhood experiences I had.
I was going to say, how have you seem to have avoided this? I don't know, the algorithm, I should say.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, are you?
I'll tell you something else that happened for me that is really fortunate. As you all know, the Greensboro is the home of the largest library in the world on leadership. We're a real behavioral science mecca, with the Center for Creative Leadership being based here. And so I was very fortunate moving here in my early 20s from the West to get to hang out with a lot of people that thought about behavioral science and how social constructs work and all that. And that's really had a big influence on me. So I just feel like the luckiest guy in the world to have had, you know, all those experiences, to get to meet and start spending time with my wonderful wife, who's wildly thoughtful and wildly sort of curious about things as well, Nancy. And so we've been together a long time. So we are soulmates, and we're able to sort of move along together and have wildly sort of weird conversations that we don't even really care about. You know, we're just, in other words, we just think it's fun to sort of play around the edges and not necessarily follow the scripts. Like, for instance, here's a small thing. You know, I like to walk. I feel better when I walk, so I walk to work most of the time. I can't tell you how many times people stop and say, "You need a ride." They think my car broke down or something, you know. But anyways, just so it's funny to have a job like I do. Most people drive to work, and I walk to work, and I don't think I'm better or worse than somebody else that doesn't do that. But I think that for me, I get to create a day where I feel more. My day is more full and rich if I have some time outside, even if I'm on the phone, which I usually am as I'm walking to work. I like it more. So why not make it up that way? And for years I wouldn't do it because I was embarrassed, because you'd show up sort of sweaty, or, you know, in summer I wear shorts and sandals because it's just too hot to wear a full set of clothes. And so I look a little goofy, but I feel better.
How far are you from work?
Well, I can get there in about 1.5 miles, but I like to go 3 miles because I enjoy being out there more. And in the summer, that's the shady route. And I'm around less cars. I like to be away from cars.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. You know what it made me think of was like the idea of, I think this is what we've been driving at, is the idea of modern convenience, and that like people have cars, right?
Yeah.
But people are striving for something. Like you still have people that are running 100 miles.
Yeah.
For these races. There's a thing called Badwater, which is 135 miles, and this is the most god-awful thing you ever heard of in your life. And
I still think there are crazy people.
yeah, but I mean, I guess it goes back to the idea. I don't know. It's just, I don't think that this was really a thing 100 years ago.
Well, I think that that we're sort of working for the man in a lot of ways. We have there's so much wisdom in sort of the 60s, 70s rock songs, and that's a line from one. And recently, Nancy and I's son told me about this, but the mayor of Bogota, not the current mayor of Bogota, which is 12 million people in this city and Colombia, said that the sign of I think it said a healthy society or a well-evolved society, I don't remember exactly how he phrased it, is not when everyone owns a car. It's when wealthy people use public transportation. So it's a sort of a metaphor, isn't it? That the idea is that we don't have to be owned by the stuff we own. There's a who owns who after a certain point.
Oh, I was thinking of what's the name of the movie? Fight Club. That's a line from Fight Club. He said, this guy, he blows up his apartment or whatever, or his condo, and he said, "You blew up all my stuff." And he said, "Did you own the stuff, or did the stuff own you?"
Yeah. Well, I just think life is so interesting. I mean, we could go on for hours and hours thinking about how we sort of necessarily we're not being forced to, but how society impacts how we behave. I mean, if you and I had been born women in Afghanistan, we'd be wearing burqas. That's the way they're making it up. And if so, it's an accident of birth. What religion. A lot of this stuff comes out of the social constructs around you, and none of them are. Some of them are kind of evil, no question, but none of them are innately evil. Usually, the evil happens at the fringes, but that becomes the dominant sort of image of it. And and I think both fringes, so just realizing that we're, sort of pulling up, don't pull up to like the height of an airliner, pull up to the height of like the moon and see, oh my gosh, this is a little orb floating through the abyss that happens to sustain life. Wow, how random is that? I mean, everywhere else I look from here, even in this galaxy. So how is the dominant species that came, the species that came to dominate that orb, how are they doing? How is this going to work out for them? And think about yourself as being a member of that sort, in that sort of context. And I just think it's more fun to look at it in that context, and you can, it at once lowers, it makes you feel very insignificant, because when you think about things in the context of time and space, we're so small. But on the other hand, it makes you feel more significant because we're a part of making it up. We're part, you can't, almost everyone in America is relatively wealthy. I mean, there's over 6 million, almost 7 billion people now on the planet, and there's only about 1 billion of us that are relatively wealthy, you know, and we're concentrated geographically in North America, Western Europe, little chunks of Asia and Australia. That's where the 1 billion are. So, you know, we're all wealthy compared to people that make less than $4 a day, which are the, you know, I think that's over 3 billion that are in that category. Maybe it's 2.5 billion. I don't remember the numbers right now. So, you know, just look at it in these contexts and say, so I am powerful. You know, I'm part of this 1 billion powerful people. So let's figure out if we can do things that we believe might be a positive influence on the trajectory of love, compassion, and service. That's the way I think about it.
You know what's so funny is I was always interested in history, and I think you are too.
Yes.
And I didn't realize why. I just sort of, I mean, some of it was sort of a fantasy to me too. Like someone else had lived in a different time in a different place.
Just random. There, with the grace of God goes thee, right?
Yeah. And so, you know, I guess that was sort of it. I guess it was sort of the same reason that people read, you know, fantasy, mystery and fantasy books and whatever else. And I always read history. And but a recent thought that I had is I'm just interested in how we got here.
Yeah, well, you know, there's a lot of big universities that have a lot of people that spend full time sort of studying that. I do love a quote by Harry Truman. He said I may not get these quotes just right, so please don't fact check me. But it was something like.
I think you get the essence of it.
Yeah. I think I've got it. But he said that the only thing new in the world is the history you've not read. You know, it's just different context, and I think that's really an important thing to realize, that concentrations of wealth usually haven't gone real well. We've got some of that going on. Let's figure it out. We don't need to make anyone like spooky or evil or whatever. It's just like the system set up that way. It happened that way. And now what are we going to do to cause there to be, and you know, like I say, I personally believe the answer is voluntary, that we come up with a sociological sort of norm, a sort of a peer pressure thing, where those with a lot of money choose to use their resources for what they consider the betterment of society. And I hope we sort of depoliticize that.
Ooh, and I guess this is the great
Then what's
debate.
better for society?
What is better for society?
That's right.
Oh, and what I think.
I don't know.
You and I could disagree on what's better for society. You know.
It does. Yeah, and I don't think that we need to make each other wrong. I mean, you know, I think there's some wonderful. It's a wonderful question. Like I say, questions are more fun than answers. You know, if you think you've got the answer, then it's not nearly as fun to be in dialogue with someone that has the answer. It's more fun to be around folk that are enthusiastic about the question, but don't get settled on the answer. I think that like, for instance, it's not perfect this way, but I enjoy reading The Economist magazine. And very often at the end of an article, they'll say, so those that think this way will take this event as meaning X, Y, Z, and those that think that way will take it as meaning A, B, C, and then the article ends. That's the way I think the world works. If we're always looking for sort of a binary answer to a question, then I think we're shutting down our curiosity and say, okay, that ship has sailed, that's what we're doing, we're done. But I think that process and continuing to mill things without, you know, being, you know, a paralysis by analysis sort of stuff. You can still go out and get things done. But I just think questions are more fun than answers. So let's hang around the questions. It reminds me of, we want to find the campfire to stay warm, but don't start thinking you're causing the fire. You know, realize that, you know, sort of the thing is to get close to the fire, but not too close. Icarus. That kind of stuff.
Tell me about some of your favorite books. We got into your reading. Tell me about some of your favorite books.
Well, You know, the last few years, I've been sort of high strung with the pandemic and all the challenges, and I've been reading mostly periodicals, to be candid. But I enjoy realizing that that I read. I like to. This is a little thing that I enjoy saying is that I read a nonfiction to learn facts, and I read fiction to learn truth. I think we learn through stories, through metaphors, and sort of whatever truth is lies in the stories, not in sort of binary facts. And so one of my favorite books, it's funny, I've not been asked this question in years, but I was asked it Saturday, and this is, what is today? Tuesday.
Tuesday.
Yeah, so in 3 days I've been asked the question, and I'll answer it the same way. There's this book by Trevanian that I really enjoy, and I read it, you know, I've read it twice, but I'll probably read it, you know, things fade. I'll read it again in about 10 years. And it's not like a perfect book, but there's some real wisdom in it, and it's called Shibumi. So it's an interesting book, and there's some parts of that just really sort of grabbed me and influenced me, and that I can sort of recite to myself or share with others that mean something to me. So I really enjoyed that book, and I enjoyed the Clavel series, you know, the whole Shogun stuff. Those are the sorts of books I've enjoyed. And nonfiction, I love David McCullough's work. I mean, read Johnstown Flood, his first book. I mean, it's unbelievable. And, you know, of course, his Truman book and his book on the Brooklyn Bridge. I mean, all that stuff is fascinating. Yeah. History's, yeah, I guess it's, most of the nonfiction I read is history.
Yeah.
You'd think by being in this job I'd read more, you know, Peters and Covey and stuff like that. And I do look at them, but what I find is that you just need to read the chapter headings, you know, because the points are kind of easy to understand most of the time.
That's fascinating. What about movies? I know you love movies.
Oh man, I just too many. You know, we mentioned earlier about how much I enjoy all the Kubrick's work.
Yeah.
You know, 2001 and, you know, Dr. Strangelove and all that. But, you know, I like the movies that are lighthearted but have real sort of poignant lessons in them. You know, Groundhog Day. You know, there's this little, I can't even find it anymore, even with all the distribution, but there's this Australian movie called Dish that's just so sweet about one of the Apollo missions, and they lost a big satellite, so out in the Aboriginal outback. It gives me goosebumps to share about this. It's just a sweet story. It makes you cry. You know, rabbit-proof fence, some of these Australian things. So yeah, movies are a really big part of what Nancy and I enjoy sharing. We watch movies probably 2 or 3 a week.
Yeah.
And, you know, of course I can, Nancy and I's son and daughter, and Nancy and I can recite most every line from "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?" You stole from my kin. It was fixing to betray us.
I'm a Dapper Dan man.
Yeah, right. Yeah. 2 weeks from anywhere. I was on an airplane once, and I just said something like, "Boy, this place is a geological oddity." 2 weeks from everywhere.
It's sort of an interesting, you have to really kind of read into that because there's a lot of little metaphors and things like that in there. And "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?"
Oh yeah, I mean it's based on the Odyssey.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I just think that some of this work is just fantastic. It's really a gift. Just a wonderful way to sort of employ your consciousness and get all this sort of wonderful stimulation. Yeah, I think that movies, I mean, a lot of the blockbusters are, you know, awesome and all that, but you don't really think about them 3 days later. It's the ones that come back to you that are sort of fun.
There's a bunch of fun ones. I was thinking of, oh my God. You know, when you said, you know, good movies with a good lesson, lighthearted. Tommy
Yeah.
Boy. Have you ever seen Tommy
Oh
Boy?
yeah.
That's it. That's it.
What's that guy's name?
Chris Farley.
Yeah,
and
Chris Farley. Yeah.
David Spade.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was, those 90s, 80s movies, they really had mastered that idea with these lighthearted movies with a great lesson.
Yeah, some of the romantic comedies and, and then some of the epic things like, Lawrence of Arabia and Gandhi, geesh, we ought to watch those every few years. It's just like, wow, they're really well put together and you see the humanity come through in some of this stuff. I just think it's fabulous. I think that, wonderful books, literature is amazing, history is amazing, social sciences is amazing, physical sciences are amazing, physics, pooh, there's all kinds of stuff out there. I mean, where do you get to, one of the things I'm getting to do now that I really enjoy, my great friend and one of my great teachers unfortunately died too young, and I'd always ask him what he was reading, and he would always have the most interesting answers. And he answered this twice in the 25 years or so that I got to be his good buddy. He said, I'm reading the 11th edition of the Britannica. And that was written in, was put out in 1911. But it was the last edition of an encyclopedia that was written in prose with opinions. And so it's wildly interesting. So through time, his daughter arranged for me to get to own his edition, his 11th edition of the Britannica. So I'm not reading it every day, but every week I'll go find something. Like tonight I'm planning to study about Buffalo Soldiers because I listened to that Bob Marley song and thought, I just know too little about Buffalo Soldiers, so I could look it up on Wikipedia. But I'd like to first read what academia, the sort of intelligentsia, thought about Buffalo Soldiers in 1911. Then read about what we're saying about them now, because history is not a, it's interpreted through the context of the way we think at the time.
You know what's even more interesting about that is the fact that our timeline isn't even necessarily our timeline.
Yeah.
There's a documentary right now, series on Amazon, and I can't remember what it's called, but it has to do with the timeline. There's different timelines, and right now we're in the Christian timeline. 2025 is the Christian, but there's a Jewish timeline.
Oh, yeah, sure, yeah.
And there's
which calendar do you want to pay attention to?
Which calendar do you want to pay attention to?
We always have it. Yeah.
And it all pretty much turned over because, one of the reasons it got popular is because Constantine wanted to build Constantinople, so he signed over half of his empire to the Pope and the Catholic Church. So the Catholic Church have been even as big as it is now if that hadn't happened. And then that came along with the rich and the corruption and all that stuff.
Brings us right back to Harry Truman. He's right. I mean, you want to see if you want to understand things, the new stuff in the universe is told through history. Yeah.
Yeah, it really is. I was really, it's funny. This was a turn that I didn't even anticipate.
Yeah, well, we could talk about, you like hamburgers more with onion or with bacon. I mean, I love what I get to do because, if you look at it, I get to mess around. We're in the culinary business. I mean, we get to, culinary delights. It's really, really fun. But then we serve, people of means, and a lot of the people that we work with came along like I did. I started as a housekeeper when I was 15 years old, as a housekeeper's assistant, really, when I was 15, and you get to sort of play restaurant and hotel every day. So, there's so many topics that are really fun and energizing to me. I mean, HVAC, electricity. How does that work? Wow. But all this stuff is a part of each of our days. And having the sort of job I do, we can talk about, food, about what it takes to get a good night's sleep, and we just get to be curious about a lot of things that directly impact our business, but none more importantly than how our sisters and brothers that are our guests or our colleagues experience themselves and how they experience us. Our mission and the most brief iteration of it is we're here to cause delight for our colleagues and for our guests. When we do that, our guests will choose to come back. Wow. And our colleagues will choose to come back with spring in their step. But that's easy to say and hard to do.
How have you, I'm sure that's had to evolve with you over time.
Actually, the way that it worked is that I didn't have the courage to say it that simply, even though I thought about it that simply when I was younger. And I think that this gray hair sort of gives you, like, what the hell, And plus, I don't have debt like I used to, because you're scared when you have debt. If you're not scared, you're stupid, because debt is, I love to say your bankers are only your friends through thick, So if you have debt and if you lose the capacity to repay it, it's not going to go well. And so, not down on bankers. It's just true, that they're in the business of
profit,
not giving money away, right?
Yeah.
It's no problem, but you just don't be naive about it. So I think that I've always, when I was even 15, 16, 17, come along working at that hotel in Missoula, Montana, I would think, why are we making this so complicated, Why are we sitting around bitching about these people that are actually, eating in the restaurant or staying in the hotel and saying that they're unreasonable? They made a deal. They're giving us, back then, $12 to stay at one of the nicest hotels in 1972, I think it was, in western Montana. Inflation's changed a lot, and why do we complain about them? Yeah, what they're asking for is reasonable. We're making it about us. Why don't we make it about others? And so I thought that I think a lot of this just came from my sort of naivete, which is serving me still. But I didn't have the courage to say it sort of out loud for years. It sort of evolved.
And you get that because I've been to I've been to the proximity. I've eaten there. I've stayed there. Just and you can tell it's one of the reasons I wanted to have you here, because I was so fascinated with, the owner operator idea and the services. I've never been disappointed. I can tell you that.
Oh,
much.
I'm so glad to hear that.
Yeah,
Well, we're living the dream. We're very careful to not sort of create a dream we don't want to live. So we got to some intersections. I think this may be interesting for you, where we could have grown significantly. We could have 30, 40 hotels now. But I realized, Nancy and I realized, that it wouldn't be fun. That it would be typical, it'd be predictable, that's what you're supposed to do. But we realized that having fewer businesses that we're really intimately involved with was how we wanted to create our experience. So we decided to not go the path of big expansion, and instead we wanted to concentrate in a smaller geographic area and sort of live out our life experiment, and this sort of experiment, and it's so wonderful that my good friend and partner Mike Weaver was right there with us, that we don't have to grow. So instead, we pay down our debt, and we put our eggs in one basket and we look after the basket. That's our sort of philosophy. and it's more fun. It's maybe not as like Vogue magazine fashionable sort of thing in the capitalist world, but it's the way we choose to do it. And you know, so we can employ our resources ever how we choose, and that's how we chose to do it.
Mm-hmm. And this goes back to you don't beat to everybody else's drum necessarily.
Well, I think that we all, I think that I really hope that more and more of us, and I think I fall for it a lot more than I believe I do, but I hope that more and more of us live a fully volitional life. We recognize that the people that came before us, the generations that came before us, didn't have volitional lives. They weren't able to volunteer. Like, you know, I have a career now. I could, you know, I chose it. You know, so my idea is if you don't want to work, don't hire out. So when you have rough days, just say, hey, I hired out for this. Let's deal with it, and you know, let's be objective about this and not make it about us. But it's a larger picture. So I hope that more and more of us embrace the idea that we are so fortunate. If you go back just a few generations, even in my family, being white people in the middle of America, you know, if you were born on a farm, you were a farmer. You know, it was only, you know, after, you know, probably between the two world wars that people saw that they could go do something else. And you sort of lived within your circumstances. But imagine if you were born before that and you were black in America, you could have been a slave, you know. So it's just sort of random that we are getting to live in an era where we get to volunteer. So, you know, you didn't get to volunteer if you're a slave. You really kind of didn't know you had the ability to volunteer to do something else if you're raised on a farm and were born in 1911. You know, you became a farmer. And so that's a wonderful gift that society and American society has evolved for us. So let's embrace it. Let's not be victim to this advantage. But it is confusing because it's almost easier if someone hands you a script and say, okay, this is how you live your life. It's an easier game. But if they just hand you a blank sheet of paper and say, how do you want to fill it out? It's like, holy cow, you know, this is on me. So I just think it's a wonderful, challenging thing. It's not necessarily easier. It may be easier sort of physically, but it's psychologically, I think it's harder. And so I think and there's so many, how do you really know that if you volunteered for the optimal thing? I don't think you ever know, just pretend it. And pretty soon you'll get to be 68 and you'll say, oh, I must have volunteered for the right thing because I have some level of contentment, some level of joy. I get to experience tranquility and enthusiasm, and those are the things that are important to me. That's the way I think about it.
Every man is the actor of his own ideals.
Oh yeah, there you go. Wow, yeah.
I think that's Nietzsche.
Oh, you're yeah. I don't know, but I like the idea.
Yeah, I was going to say, you know, you could have been 18. I could have been 18 years old at any point. I could have been 18 years old in 1776.
Yeah.
Where they lined you up and said, "All right."
Yeah. Don't shoot till you see the white of their eyes.
I thought that was fast. Like, how the heck did we come up with that? How did we come up with that? That was ideal. That was a good idea for everybody to just stand there and shoot. And I was reading Robert Lecky's. Robert Lecky wrote this book. It was called "Helmet for My Pillow." He's a World War II soldier, and he grew up in Paterson, New Jersey, which is right next where I grew up in Clifton. And he wrote the Saga of the American Revolution, which it's huge. You know, it's about that thick. It's huge. And but there's a lot of little facts about, you know, the American Revolution that I learned in there. One of them was that deserters for the British, they would hang them so that the following lines would see that and it'd scare the hell out of them and be like, yeah, see, this is what happens.
We're lucky to be living now, even as sort of mixed up, crazy world as it seems to be.
Right.
But you know, the Ken Burns special, The American Revolution, comes out in just a couple of weeks. And you ask about what I read. I actually watch a lot of documentaries too, and I've not been disappointed in. I didn't watch the baseball one, but most of these Burns documentaries.
I love the baseball.
Oh yeah, I need to watch that one.
So good.
Yeah, the country music one was okay, but but most of them are really good. So the point is that you really look forward to in some of these documentaries. Like I studied Chicago for a few years for some reason. It's a fascinating story, and there's a documentary about it that just wildly opened my eyes about ingenuity and how inventive and resourceful the leaders and the architects of the built environment, but also the architects of the way the community worked in Chicago. So a lot of the stuff I've benefited from have been from documentaries too.
So I was like, oh no, you can't, because I was thinking about the conversation I had with Mary Kay when I had her on a couple of years ago, maybe 2 years ago, and we redid it, and they're both wonderful conversations, but they weren't you know what I mean, you didn't have the same, I guess we weren't in, it's just not the same environment, we weren't in the same place, we weren't going to be here again, and I was like, oh, and we would have had another wonderful conversation, and I would have loved it, but you know what I mean, it's never the same as,
No.
there's just something about it that's, so what do we talk about, living in the present?
Well, yeah. Oh, yeah. It's like a river's never the same twice.
A river's never the same twice.
It's never the same water.
It's always moving.
Yeah, it's moving and it's different water. I mean, it's sort of a silly metaphor, but
Right.
But yeah, I do think that, and with this all things like biorhythms and all that, it's all real. I mean, some days we are grouchy. I think that one of the tricks to being a person is to recognize where you are, and if you're sort of feisty, then decide how to act before you act, and if you act before you decide, then get good at apologizing.
Easier said than done, right?
Yeah, well, yeah. Easier said than done is right. Apologizing is a difficult thing because it means that you were wrong, and egos are basically mechanisms that say, I want to be right. So, and we all have egos, so being wrong is not our favorite thing.
Ooh, and this is where this is one of those other things that this social construct that we're talking about with algorithms and everything, is what happens is we get in our, if you and I have an argument, what happens is we leave that argument and our brain sort of goes in survival mode.
Yeah.
And we sort of have like a board meeting upstairs, right? And we think about, we put up a defense mechanism, and I'm going to say, well, here's why he was wrong. Yeah, and I was right. And you start building up all these little things without anybody else being on the other side, being like, just hold on, just slow down. He might have had a couple good points here. Just sit down for a minute and just think about this, and think about it this way. Think about it from his perspective or their perspective.
Walk 2 moons in their moccasins.
Walk 2 moons in their moccasins.
Yeah. Well, again, I can espouse all this stuff. It doesn't mean I do it. You know what I mean? I just want to be clear that I really like that idea, but it's really hard. Like we're both white men. How easy is it for us to walk in the moccasins, in the shoes of a teenage African American woman? It's not easy. That doesn't mean we shouldn't endeavor to do it, and we shouldn't be humble about how not good we are at it. But I think that we can learn by just asking. It's amazing. Again, my good friend Janetta B. Cole, has taught me so much, and one of them was, if you're in a trusting environment, just ask. Ask. What do you think I don't understand about this? About you. And so anyway, I just feel so fortunate, I'm sure you do too, to get to live in a time where we can have conversations like this and then go out and, worry about lunch and dinner and about greeting our guests at the hotels and making sure that everything's right where they get to stay. And it's just a lot of fun to be a part of a larger mechanism and to realize that we're, as I've said several times, we're not evolved. We're evolving. These ideas are evolving, and let's have fun with it, and let's not get too wound up about little part. Well, it's fine to get wound up. I just don't choose to play the wound up game. I choose to, I get plenty ticked off about stuff, but my idea is that let's look at things in a larger context.
And you ever wonder why? I'm like, why this thing are we getting wound up about when there's so many other things? I'm like, oh my God, why aren't we?
Well, I think we're highly influenced by what someone down the road says.
Yeah.
Like the weather. Like, oh man, this is terrible weather today, and I'm thinking, well, actually, this is exactly what we need if we want to have the crops grow well in the spring. We need to, refill the aquifers. So what's so bad about some rain? Maybe you don't get to play golf. Well, our children both got to go to a Montessori environment. And it really makes sense to me as some of the philosophies. And one of the things that Maria Montessori said is that there's really not bad weather. There's just not good preparation. If you're going to be out in the weather, be prepared for whatever the weather is. And so you get my point, is that we can make up something that actually is in our mutual and individual best interest to make it up as being bad when it isn't. Rain, like it's raining today. I think it's a beautiful day. It's like, why make up a day as being bad? Now Jamaica's having a bad day. I mean, geez, that Category 5.
Yeah.
I hope it works out optimally, but it's not good.
Going back, I was thinking about your first. What brought you here to Greensboro anyway?
Oh, when I was working at that hotel in Missoula, Bill Sherrill came in as the manager when I was maybe a junior in high school, probably later in my junior year. And Bill is the person that now has Red Oak Brewing, and he's from Winston-Salem, and he and I became friends. We worked together for a couple of years there in Missoula, and he asked me to, and I followed him to Seattle, and worked in a hotel there after I graduated from high school, and so he asked me to move back here. I think I was 21. Well, I was 21, 22, something like that, to help him open a restaurant called Franklin's Off Friendly out near Guilford College. And I wrote in my journal back then that, Bill's given me an opportunity and, be a general manager of a restaurant when I'm 21, that I wouldn't get anywhere else. But I'm a Westerner, so this is like a 3-year gig, and I'm gonna be back out, west. And but I really grew to like it here really quickly, and I'll tell you one of the reasons why. In everywhere else that I lived, I felt categorized, and when I came here, I was categorized, but in a way that I liked. I noticed that Greensboro it was then, and I think it still is to a certain degree, a merit-based society. People, I was running around, leading this restaurant, and the sort of captains of industry and of society and all that were very polite to me, not just because they wanted a table on Valentine's Day, but they were like, literally, one of the reasons I asked Mike Weaver to be my partner is I was only here maybe a year and a half, and he called and invited me to lunch, and I thought, oh, he's got an angle. He's the head of the city club at the time. I thought he might want to be recruiting a chef, and maybe I knew somebody or something. But what he said I'll never forget. He said, "Well, you probably wondered why I asked you to lunch." I asked you to lunch because I really think that you're contributing. This may not be verbatim. You're contributing positively to Greensboro. You know that what you're doing and what Franklin's is doing is really important. And I just want to thank you, and I hope that you choose to stay in Greensboro. I think that you add to our community. That's incredible. I mean, here I am. I'll never forget. I was wearing, it was before I could get shoes that fit. I'm a little guy, so I was wearing these doggone hush puppies that were too big, but they were comfortable to be on your feet all day, and they were so long that I always had to put napkins in the end of them, and I'm wearing, suede shoes at the City Club. I felt like such a dork. I had my feet tucked up under the chair so people wouldn't see it, but I could remember everything about that lunch with my good friend Mike. And I so respect him and love him for being loving toward me, because I was a hired hand. I am a hired hand. We're all volunteers, but I was always treated like a hired hand. But in Greensboro, not just Mike, but a number of other people, they really caused me to say, I think fundamentally, I know I've used this expression earlier, we want to be understood and appreciated, and I felt understood and appreciated here.
That's funny. I was thinking about how to win friends and influence people. The feeling of importance.
Yeah, I felt valued. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I feel valued. I mean, I feel valued, but I also think we're only as good as the next meal we serve. So that value can go away real fast. You can screw it up in a New York minute. Don't get cocky.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
That's a very interesting thought.
Oh, I experienced it every day. I even tell my colleagues, people say don't be fearful and they're wrong. Fear is a sign of intelligence, just don't get an ulcer. As long as your fear is based on something rational, like we could screw up serving our guests tonight, or, maybe this is undercooked or overcooked, you can say those, be concerned, be fearful, but don't go getting weird with yourself or with others. You use that energy. Let it burn clean, not toxic.
In the right direction, I guess.
Yeah. Don't deny it.
Yeah. And I guess that's true for all of us, and that's in any industry, in any endeavor.
Oh, yeah. It's so silly to think, well, I have
Too big to
right.
fail.
Yeah. We ought to. I just think we're well served. We understand that we got to earn our keep. No matter what our level of wealth or power, or whatever it may be. Make sure you're contributing, and if you're not contributing, then get out of the game. I'm not saying commit suicide. I'm saying go get on the sidelines and go do something else. But I really think, and I've promised my colleagues, and I've asked them to tell me that if I'm not, worried and using my concern in productive ways, to tell me, because I'll get out of your way, because maybe I won't notice it.
You know what this reminds me of, and I mentioned Rocky before. Have you seen all the Rockies?
No, not all of them.
Okay, well there's one in Rocky 3, in the early part of Rocky 3, when Mr. T calls him out, and Mickey, his manager, gets to him, and Mickey's been trying to avoid Mr. T, because Mr. T, he's an animal,
Yeah.
he's a real he's a hungry fighter, and Mickey was sort of carrying him, as he says later, and that's sort of Rocky's conflict that he has. And then anyway, so he tells him, he said, you're going to fight him, but you're not going to do it with me.
Ah.
He said, why? He said, because you don't have it anymore. He said, you're hungry, but you're not a killer like this guy. He said, you ain't been hungry since you won that belt.
Yeah.
And he tells him that, and it absolutely crushes him, because he thinks he's this great fighter, and now he's not what he wasn't the animal he was when he was hungry, and he didn't have anything, and he had to struggle to take Apollo to the 15th round. And That's what you made me think of was is you stay hungry and stay just a little bit fearful.
Oh yeah, yeah. Don't go crazy, and don't injure yourself physically, but be rational. You know that there's no reason to think the sky's falling every day, and there's no reason to believe that it might not. you know, just be careful, and have contingency plans. In 2005, I think it was 2005, we put together a group of our insurance carriers and some public health officials, and we came out with a 26-page contingency plan for a global respiratory pandemic, for how to run our business in a pandemic.
When did you write this?
2005.
2005. Now,
Yeah.
what was the? How did you come up with
Well,
that?
Nancy, my wife, is really a wonderful person, as I mentioned, but she's also really enjoys history, and she knows that and taught me that the Spanish flu, it really should never have been called Spanish flu. Do you know why it's called Spanish flu? Because Spain didn't sign on during World War I to either side, and they wouldn't sign a pact that they wouldn't report negative things to the for the what was it called? But anyway, the American and its allies. What was it called? There was the Axis and the anyway.
I know what
our
yeah.
side, and so the rest of the press wouldn't write about it, but the Spanish press did. So they called it the Spanish flu, even though it didn't even happen there. It either started, I think, somewhere in England or in Leavenworth, Kansas. No one knows for sure. But anyway, so that she was, you know, quite a student of the Spanish flu, and no, you know, it was an amazing problem, and there's no reason to think the Spanish flu wouldn't come back. So we've talked about that a lot, and when we travel, we enjoy going to cemeteries and looking at, you know, because they're architecturally and historically interesting, and you'd always notice all these, you know, gravestones, people all different ages in those years, you know, because Spanish flu killed a lot of people fast. Wow. So anyway, I think that's what really caused it. But we're also in a business that we're real close to people every day, our colleagues and our guests, so we knew anything that happened along the respiratory side. Oh, and I think it was when Ebola, that was probably the trick that took us to say
That's
do it.
right.
Because we're like, holy cow. I mean, you know, dying like 3 days of getting sick doesn't sound like a lot of fun. And so that was probably the trigger. But we had the foundation of Nancy's, not morbid, but sort of academic interest in global pandemics, so it would more likely be respiratory.
Wow. That's.
It sounds cocky saying this but you know, I hope it doesn't come across that way. It's just a matter of fact that we were worried about it. We wanted to know how it would affect our business and what our contingency plans would be around it. So that really helped us. Not a lot, because you still had to deal with it, you know, as it kind of came along. But and it's very different than the Spanish flu, the COVID pandemic was.
How did you guys do during the? I mean, I think everybody took a hit during the pandemic. How do you think you've come out on the other side of it?
Very different. The difficult thing, just sort of technically business-wise, was being so wildly understaffed for 3.5, 4 years coming out of the pandemic. You know, we have over 700 colleagues now. Well, in 2022 we needed 700, but we only had 500. So we were 150 to 250 to 200 people short for years. And that's one of the reasons we were slow reopening our Lucky 32 restaurant, is we would take people from there and just open it up. Like, we're usually open 14 meal periods, you know, lunch and dinner 7 days, and we were down to 3 nights. You know, we were.
How long was Lucky 32 closed?
Oh, a long time. We didn't reopen it until the end of October 2020. March to October.
Okay.
And then we only reopened it 3 nights a week for a couple of years.
Yeah.
It was crazy because we needed all the people to go. You have to have the hotel restaurants open, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So, and we were just so short. So that was the real sort of difficult part. I mean, it was all, none of it was sort of like you know, a picnic, but that was, and that's the sort of the more difficult thing to sort of grow out of, is that we have this wonderful culture around, you know, really being of service to our colleagues and our guests, and we as a society became sort of mercenary coming out of that. It's like, okay, you know, there was a mindset, sort of a collective mindset adjustment, and sort of not getting back to, but getting to sort of how we bring to life our ideas of service. You know, service and gratitude are always their own rewards. It's an interesting thing, and so that's been challenging. But what we have noticed is that more and more of the people that have joined us since the pandemic are really wonderful people that sort of meet us where we are, and understand that we're just you know, the way I look at QW is we're just a bunch of enthusiastic 9th graders that got together and say, hey, let's build a homecoming float and let's win the contest. Let's win the best float contest. We just want to be a lot of enthusiastic amateurs that show up and say, let's do this together. That's the dream of QW. And so we're getting more and more people that are meeting us there. Now, we're not cynical if someone doesn't meet us there and say, hey, I'll do this stuff, but don't expect me to, you know, I'll start skipping to work when I get real close to the door, you know, but, you know, I don't mind actors, but it's more fun when we have more and more people in our on the team now that are sort of meeting us at, let's go play and let's pretend like it's real. Let's go play. Let's have fun. Let's nail it. Wow. And more people like that. So that's sort of the sunny side of it.
And you mean like coming in with the energy and enthusiasm?
Yeah. Well, but there's a tremendous turnover rate in our industry. It's usually so for instance, you know, we have 700 people, but we'll send out about 1,600 W-2s. So it's 100% turnover, over 100% in our industry, and we don't try to be immune to that. A lot of people work in restaurants and hotels on a, you know, I'm going to work here until my girlfriend gets a graduate degree, or, you know, there's all these temporary, it's also often a transitional sort of employment place you can land. So a lot of people are with us 1 to 3 years. A lot of people that are with us more than 3 years might be there 16, 18 years later. So there's a lot of turnover. So what I'm saying is more of these, you know, 700, 800 people that we'll hire in a year. It used to be maybe like 2 and 10 were really like, hey, this is fun. And there's a lot of them that would decide that they could make it fun, and some that just didn't like it. But now there's a higher percentage of people that come in and say, yeah, this sounds like a good place to play. I can't really explain why I think that's the case, why we're getting a higher percentage of really kind of what we call good eggs, but what we do. It's really exciting to see people that I didn't know 5 years ago coming in and joining us with this sort of volitional enthusiasm. You can choose enthusiasm.
What caused you to endeavor the restaurant business? Because it's probably one of the most riskiest businesses you could ever take up.
Well, I stumbled into it. You know, being in the hotel business, I ended up on the food and beverage side, and then I felt like it wasn't the right path for me. That I didn't have role models that stayed in it a long time. That there weren't not very many role models I really appreciated. There's certainly some, but not. It's like 1 out of 10 people that I sort of worked with that I was like, yeah, I really like the way this person handles themselves, and I want them to I want to emulate them. Um, so anyway, and it's difficult not only because of the reasons you mentioned, but socially, normally, you have weekends off and stuff like that. Well, our busiest time is the weekends. It's so weird when something goes wrong on a Sunday and all the service providers are like, it's a Sunday? And I'm like, yeah, it's our busiest day. What the hell are you doing? Sitting around drinking a brewski at noon watching NFL. Come on, come help us. And so anyway, I got out of the business for, not really out. A friend of mine and I started a beer and wine distributing company.
Okay.
And I felt half asleep. I mean, it was slower. I didn't enjoy the fewer transactions, just human transactions, that kind of stuff. Mm. And I realized that I was running away from something rather than running to something. So I sort of really took inventory. Nancy helped me with it. We read a bunch of books and did a lot of, there was one book that really was helpful that asked you to write essays about things that you experienced as being successful in your life and that kind of stuff. So I realized that I was running away from something that I really loved. So I was letting the tail wag the dog, sort of thing. I had a couple of aspects of the restaurant and hotel business that are never going to be pleasant. It's just part of the game. But realizing that every profession has negative aspects to it, and you don't get someone feeding you grapes peeling you grapes and feeding them to you on the deck of your yacht every day. I mean, that doesn't sound like much fun if you do it every day too. So I changed my mind, and when you change your mind, mindset means so much. I decided that, boy, this is my path, and I'm so lucky to get to be on this path. And since then, I've not felt victim to my career choices, but maybe, it's hard to imagine, but maybe 3 times a year for a few hours each, where it used to be half the time. Because I just changed my mind. Be careful what you do with your mind. You change your mind, and the rest of you will follow.
Your mind is a very powerful thing.
Yeah, well, it's what we interpret consciousness through.
Yeah. There's a couple thoughts right there. One of them was I was thinking about as you were, dealing with problems and endeavors and things that just really want to deal with, but they're there, right? You didn't ask for them, but it reminded me of The Godfather 2 and Hyman Roth when Michael Corleone and Hyman Roth are sort of sizing each other up, and then finally it comes out why, what's really going on. The elephant was sort of being let out of the room when they were in Havana, and they talk about the real character they were talking about was Ben Siegel, but they were talking about Mo Green, who was the character in the movie, and why he was. And anyway, that's what it came down to. And he said, this is the business we've chosen.
Yeah.
And it's just that was the mafia business, and you don't.
Yeah.
This is the business we've chosen. So I always use that, and that's what that made me think of.
It's
problems
exactly,
on a Sunday.
Yeah.
This is the business we've chosen.
Yeah, I think I enjoy saying this, and I don't think it's based on any facts or anything, but I think there's only about 15 pillars of wisdom, and the really foundational pillars of wisdom, and we ought to talk about them in a zillion ways because an idea kind of comes in and lands, but that is a pillar of wisdom is, grow where you're planted. That's what he's saying. That's what I'm saying. And then in this world where we are volunteers, we get to decide where we're planted. So then you can end up being victim to yourself. Well, I picked the wrong thing. There can be a really kind of a weird cycle. So, all paths in life are the same. So choose the path with heart and pursue it impeccably. I didn't make that up. Carlos Castellanos said that, but put that in your pipe and smoke it.
Wow. And you were talking about the
mind.
But
that's really a good one. Put all paths in life are the same, so choose the path with heart and pursue it impeccably. So I'd like to dissect it a little bit. So what I believe he's saying is that don't think that your path is less or more noble than somebody else's. Just say, hey, these are the same. Brain surgery, restaurants, firefighter, a clerical, it's a path. So choose a path that has heart, something that gets you out of bed in the morning. You say, I'm going to do this, because life's too short to wake up and say, oh shit, every day. You know what I mean? It's no fun. Why do that? Would you have to edit that?
Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, all right.
I'll have to ask some questions, maybe. I don't know.
All right.
I'd love to keep it.
Yeah, I don't know.
If it were up to me, I'd keep it. I don't care.
I can say, oh, shucks. But anyway, that's not a good way to employ this sort of God-given gift of consciousness. Come on. Get up and be enthusiastic and realize you get to choose that. But choose something that nature sort of leads you to be enthusiastic about. So choose the path with heart and pursue it impeccably. So you'd think I'd read that whole book, but in fact, someone had mentioned that exact line to me, and I refused to read the book because I'm like, that was probably 45 years ago. I refused to read the book because I'm still processing that sentence. I just think that's just too much to digest. I don't want to bloat.
Wow.
Yeah. All paths in life are the same. Choose the path with heart and pursue it impeccably. So that helps me, because then I think, this is really hard. And I said, well, it's the path I've chose. How do I sort of impeccably pursue it today? And then I go out and stumble around and look silly and feel like I'm inadequate, and then I laugh at myself and get up and do it again.
Getting up and doing it again.
Yeah.
And laughing at yourself. Those are two pillars of wisdom, I think, as well.
You can talk about them a lot of different ways, but false humility is false humility, but humility that's genuine is really important, I think, to the human experience. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think you get to joy through, sort of giggling at yourself.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah. Yeah, you really do. What's so funny is I was reading, there was a book on I read a book on like Zen Tibetan monks, and it had to do, they go over all these different things. I wrote like so many quotes down from this book because it was so powerful, and they talked about how it was almost like everything we see or we think or is in front of us is like up to our interpretation. So what we think is just it's whatever our influence or our background or whatever else was. Because I think, like you said, like if I had grown up in Israel or wherever the heck else, Asia, they think completely differently. And some of the experiences I've had now, I'd have a totally different mindset on.
Yeah, no, I agree with that completely. And we can decide what we're sort of focused on. I mean, in Tibet, this isn't universal and it's changing through time, but they wake up more thinking about sort of the spiritual aspect of being, and we wake up thinking more about sort of the material aspects. So there's this cup now is empty, and it isn't Christmas, but I just happened to get a Christmas mug. But so what's in that cup? This relates to your comment about Tibet eventually. So what's in there?
Air.
Yeah, there's air. That's a thing. What else is in there?
Oh, whatever material this is made out of.
So the point is, we think about material things,
mm-hmm.
but they're thinking more about energy. There's gravity, mm-hmm. there's light, there's all sorts of energy within that vessel. But we think about physical things. It's just the construct we came along with. But we ask a Tibetan, probably just someone on the street, what's in there, and they'd say, Well, gravity, light, you know, thermal energy, you know. So it's a wonderful example that we pay attention to what we're sort of trained to pay attention to. So in some societies, we pay more attention to energy, and in other societies, we pay more attention to material. And that's what's so beautiful, I think, about physics, because what's matter and what's energy, you know, it can get sort of, they can blend, you know. I don't remember all the sort of buzzwords around that, but our son, the physicist, would be able to tell us. So you get my point that's playing exactly into, you know, if we'd been born in Afghanistan or Ethiopia or even of this era, but what about, you know, 600 years ago or 600 years from now? It's just sort of random. We're here now. Then we would notice what's in that glass based on what we were sort of taught as we came along.
I was about to ask, you said it was, do you think it's random that we're here now, or is there a grand design?
I don't know. I think that it goes back to that campfire thing I was saying earlier, is that I'd enjoy the mystery, but I don't need to have the answer to the mystery. The question is too dang much fun. Why? I do think that I am well served to imagine being on a slave ship as a slave. I think that serves me well. It's really painful to imagine. I don't want to imagine it, but it serves me well. So I think it's fun to use our imagination to walk in other people's shoes. But I think it's random. I mean, I think that me being here now and the whole, just the way that, you know, what would happen if I didn't, you know, I was trying to get a job in a gas station. I couldn't find a job, and I got a job as a housekeeper's assistant. You know, what would my life be like? Would I've ever met Nancy? You know, I mean, no. I mean, it's just all these little things. Well, isn't society sort of floating along in a similar sort of breeze? So I choose to see it as random that I'm here now. But if there's a grander design, then I'm glad to be a part of it. It isn't something that I've spent a lot of time thinking about. I enjoy the moments, and I don't, like I say, I think I personally enjoy questions more than answers.
Okay, so let's go back to, you know, so Lucky 32 opens, right?
Yeah.
So what were you, I mean, what was your, like, how many hours did you spend a day? What was your involvement? And you were scared, you were in debt, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, but be careful with debt. It was good debt.
Okay.
A lot of the debt when we started was subordinated debt that was with my partner put in, so that if we screwed up, I wouldn't have to repay that because it was part of the partnership deal. So we had equity, but we wanted to be 50-50 partners. And since I didn't have as much money put in his, and he's so smart and worldly, and knew that it was in his best interest to not, that I wouldn't do it, but he also realized it was his interest to stay 50-50. That's a good partnership sort of thing. That we had relatively clean debt, but still debt. But you still have obligations, you know. The financial part of it isn't as big as the emotional part of it. You know, how would have I felt about myself starting a restaurant at 32 years old, Lucky 32, you get it? As my dad's race car number too, but it was another reason for it. So there was all kinds of emotional and technical sort of angst around all of it. So yeah, I've always worked a lot. I like the career dimension of my life. It's a really fun place to be. And I like the other dimensions, my family social dimension and the spiritual dimension. All those are fabulous. And I don't feel like I'm leaving those other dimensions, neglecting them by focusing a lot of my energy on the career professional side of my life. I really like it. It's fun.
Tell me about your partnership with Mike. You touched on it a little bit. How did that come about? How did this form? Where did this come from?
Well, he was nice, you know, and he was also, and still is, and he was nice to me when I first, you know, was 21, 22 years old, whatever, and he, so I made a list when I decided I wanted to start a business of people that I'd like to have as a financial partner, and I didn't ever want sort of a full partner. And so Mike was on the first page, and there was about 15 people on the second page and maybe 40 people on the third page. I don't remember precisely. But Mike was my first pick because I really admired the way he handled himself. Making money is one thing, but having sort of humanity to the person. And everyone had humanity, but he was the one that I felt like I jived with the best. So I called him and told him I was thinking about starting a business and if he'd be interested in helping me, and he said yes. We had lunch, and we were partners the next day. I asked him to support me by building a building and leasing it to us and by loaning me money. And he said he'd rather be my partner, and I said I don't want a partner. And he said, well, I said I don't want a partner because I second guess myself all the time, and if I have to second guess myself and somebody else, I don't think I'm going to be effective, and I think I won't be happy. And he said, I know how to be a good partner. Why don't we just set it up? You know, because he's been a partner in a lot of businesses. He's 20 years older than me. He's a little further down the line. And so he said, why don't we set it up where we only make decisions together if it involves over a threshold of an amount of money or setting your salary. And I said, great. And we shook hands on it, and we were partners the next day with a little 2-paragraph letter, 1-page letter that we both signed and said, this is the basis of our partnership. And 38 years later, I don't remember precisely, we opened in June 5th, 1989, and we started about a year and maybe 14 months before that we started the company. So that's how we got together, and Mike's amazing. He's taught me so much. You know, he's just an incredible person. You know, he and his family, he started investing in apartment complexes when he was like 12, 14 years old with his parents. And back then, apartments were segregated. And he went to his parents and said, I want to integrate our housing. And they said, well, you know, we have mortgages on this. We could lose our businesses if the occupancy doesn't stay high. And he said, okay, well, then I'll just give you my stock. And they're like, well, you feel that strongly about it, then go ahead and do it. But you're going to have to manage it and figure it out. So they were the first, you know, sort of major, to my knowledge, and according to the newspaper years ago when they did articles about this, to voluntarily integrate their housing. And they did it in a real low-key way. And so that, you know, I really believe you only know if you hold a value if you're willing to voluntarily inconvenience yourself in service of it. And so he inconvenienced himself and his family by taking that risk because he held a value. So people that operationalize their values, I'm attracted to. That's why I wanted to be partners with Mike and still do.
Yeah, and you must have put in a lot of time, you know, early on, and you know, trying to design everything, figure out what you wanted to do. You know, you had some experience before with your mom, and you had already were managing one earlier on Friendly Avenue.
Yeah.
But tell me, what were you looking at? I mean, were you looking at other restaurants? Were you?
Oh, yeah.
How did all the early business go?
Well, I didn't have all these exact words back then, but you wanted to expand your frame of reference. You want to have a broad frame of reference, like, you know, if this works in Atlanta, then how do you contextualize that to Greensboro? Mm-hmm. So I'd travel a lot and look at restaurants. I was fortunate to, be in Seattle and Phoenix and Palm Beach and, moving around working in hotels in Charleston, South Carolina. But then I would travel a lot and go to different restaurants and see what was working, what wasn't working, and then come up with common denominators. And, some of them were kind of banal that then, and I think still, it seemed that restaurants that had, between 140 and 160 seats in the main dining room, 40 or 60 seats in the bar, and had an open kitchen were busy. So I thought, okay, let's do that. It's like, okay, that seems to work. Let's have an open kitchen and let's have that many seats, and if it works in these other places, maybe it'll work for us here in Greensboro. It wasn't very. That's kind of boring compared to some other stories
Right.
might have been able to tell.
Right.
Or make up.
Right.
But then the design and everything, that was a lot of fun, and it still is. I mean, because dining out is not just about nutrition and all that. It's about an experience. There's a level of theater and ambiance, and creating that is just a blast. I mean, it's one of the great joys. The culinary side is a great joy. I'm just like a kid that likes all the toys.
I was going to say, how much hand did you have in pick? Your wife was a part of this too.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So did y'all, did you sit down and think about? The original idea was Southern kitchen.
No, it wasn't originally Southern. Yeah. It was more of a seasonal thing where we changed our menus every 4 weeks, not the whole menu, about 20% of it. Okay. And there was always all these different themes. Like one of my favorites was called Mom's Way All May, and we'd ask our guests to give us some of their favorite recipes that they prepare for their kids or their mom made for them. So we had matzo ball soup, and we had my Aunt Ladine's strawberry rhubarb cobbler from Iowa. It's just really, really fun. So there's a real seasonal, appropriate to the season, not only what's growing, but what's going on sort of, Mother's Day month. And so that was sort of the idea, is that being in a smaller town than Atlanta, Washington, D.C., or Seattle, we wanted people to enjoy dining with us more often. And so having a variety was one of the things I felt like was important. If we were in Seattle, we'd have probably had a smaller menu with less variety, less seasonal changes. And then that evolved. Now I think we change our menus rather than 12 times a year, we change them 6 times a year at Lucky's, and similar number of times at the other Printworks and Green Valley Grill. So yeah, that was sort of what we started with. But yeah, in terms of the culinary side, all the food, it was so much fun remembering when we started this. We had a little condo out near Sedgefield, and we had the lights hung at exactly the same heights with the same light bulbs on the table that we were considering, and all the silverware, and we'd cook the food, and we'd sit there and we'd play the playlist, and we set up this whole environment. So we do that now with, like when we did Printworks or Green Valley Grill. We still dance with the one that brung us, and still go through all those gyrations.
Are you saying you sat in like your living room or your dining room and
we created a stage set, just like this is a studio. We had it all set up. We had the lights and the music and everything, and said, now how do we feel being here? And how does this taste? And what do you think of this plate? Is this soup spoon too big or too small? We do all that. It's just too much fun.
Every little detail.
Every little detail. It's too much. Why would you leave it? Why would you delegate the fun stuff? I mean, yes, we delegated. I mean, we collaborated, and we were also cooking food at two of the chefs that were helping us.
Right. You want some subject matter experts in the field.
Oh yeah, we did that. You don't do much on your own. It's crazy to think that. We had a lot of collaborators, but you also need to realize, hey, we're the ones that are responsible here. So, let's not make all the decisions, but let's make sure all the decisions are consistent with our ideas.
Wow, that's really cool.
It's really fun. Yeah, you don't need to be, Amazon to have fun in business. I mean, in fact, I think it's more fun to be out here sort of grinding it out every day, and playing with all these great details. And that's one of the other reasons we didn't expand our company like we have had the opportunities and still do greatly, is that it's just why delegate, why lose the stuff that brings you joy, that causes you to skip to work. It's a joy to skip to work. If you're skipping to work, don't screw it up, by adding so many layers of people and systems and books and SOP manuals where you sort of lose your soul, because you're pursuing some greater sort of economic goal when everything's temporary. So, we like the idea of showing up.
It's so interesting because I was listening to this story about a plumber, and he started out plumbing. He had one truck, and he did everything, fixed sinks and toilets and all this stuff, and then the demand rose, his business grew, and so he gets another truck, he hires out maybe a buddy or whatever, and then all of a sudden, before he knows it, in a couple, after 5 years, 10 years or whatever, he's got 20 trucks, and he's not even plumbing anymore.
Yeah.
Because now he's a manager, and now he's tied up in Excel spreadsheets and business this, and he's got to meet these people, and he's he just finally stopped and was like, I don't even enjoy what I'm doing anymore.
There you go.
And he's like, someone just said, well, why don't you just sell the rest of them and go back to plumbing? And he said, I think, yeah. What the hell? You see, so I think he sold the business and started his own little one and whatever.
There you go. I think that my brother speaks my mind. That's exactly my point, is that we just caught it before we bought the 20 trucks.
Yeah.
Yeah. We decided that'd be more fun.
My brother speaks my mind,
yeah.
Yeah. So then O. Henry came along.
Oh yeah. So, the hotel business is really fun. There's literally not a lock on the front door. I mean, this is a community thing.
It is, yeah.
And restaurants are too, but hotels are at the next level, and they're just so cool. And we're living in a boring era of hotels in America, and it came out of the high interest rates in the early 80s, that the companies that owned hotels got in trouble because their interest rates went way up, and their operating profits got hurt because of their capital costs, not because of their operating realities. So they decided to split the industry. Most all hotels are owned by owner groups, real estate investment trust, and other financial mechanisms, almost like an asset class. And then they're managed by a management company, and then they're franchises of a brand. So there's three constituencies. Sometimes the franchises and the management company are the same outfit. So that all changed in the early 80s. It went to what I'm talking about, these three things. Well, and that's where one of the reasons I come up with this idea about aligned interest is that they don't have aligned interest. The owners want the most, sort of distributions each year. The management company wants the biggest fees each year. And the franchise companies want you to supplement and participate in advertising co-ops. So there's all this tension between them. And so Nancy and I, she went off to Cornell while I was out there grinding it out, washing dishes literally. And so she had more of, I like to say she's got the brains and I've got the brawn. So if this is all the brawn you got, you need a lot of brains. But anyway, Nancy really helped, was part of the sort of strategy that let's get out of the typical thing that happens in American hotels with these conflicting interests that I mentioned, but it's also not participate in the highly leveraged part of it. Most hotels borrow a lot of money and they're built to be sold. They're built, you sell them 3 to 5 years out, and you build it for X and you can sell it at a profit, then you go off and build some more. There's a lot of different ways the hotel industry operates. I could be 2 hours explaining it, but that gives us sort of a little bit of a sketch of what was going on. So we said, let's go in a contrary direction. let's highly capitalize, which Mike Weaver's always been happy with having more equity and less debt. And so we think the same way there. Let's go in with a lot of equity. Let's not mess around with any national brands in any way, shape, or form. I mean, it's amazing. Our son lives in Dallas now, and I think there's like 8 million people in the Metroplex, that in Fort Worth and Arlington and all those towns, and there's only like 2 independent hotels that are not affiliated with one of the brands or one of the management companies, and they're small. There's 30 room small enterprises in the whole area, but we have 2 right here in Greensboro, and they're actually run by an employee-owned company. It's really kind of cool. So we decided that we wanted to go against the flow of what's going on. We didn't look at these hotels as an asset class, like, oh boy, this is a good asset class to invest in. We looked at it as, let's build something that's durable, that could be here, that 100 years from now, they would say, doggone it, that's really where we should put the city center heliport, but there's a historic hotel there that we'd never want to tear down. That was our mindset when we built both of our hotels. Is let's build things and think about hundreds of years, not hundreds of months. And and with Mike's support and Nancy and I's sort of ambition, we put together a team, and we designed these hotels to be in and of the community. So when you go in there, I could give you a little tour, and there's a story about doggone near everything that relates to Greensboro's heritage, and where we are, what the sort of pillars Greensboro's been about. If you look at Greensboro's history, tremendous amount of innovation here, particularly in the social realm. The Underground Railroad, people I think credibly argue was invented here. The sit-in movement was clearly invented here. Joe McNeil and Franklin, all these.
4 18-year-old kids.
Yeah, well, I think that Joe was 17.
Oh, 17, yeah. Well,
Yeah, but they're 17 and 18.
Young.
He just died a couple months ago. What a guy. I got to know him completely accidentally.
Yeah.
Tremendous person. His family, I just can't tell you how much I think of all of them. And we have a common Western thing. He ended up in South Dakota, and he married Ina Brown, who is Chief Sitting Bull's great granddaughter, or maybe one more great. And so they're not only involved in the African American sort of traditions in America, but also obviously the Native American. And they're some of the most loving, wonderful friends I have on this earth. Incredible people. But yeah, he saw something that he didn't like. He and a few buddies didn't like it together, and they went down and sat down so we can stand up. I like that's a Rosa Parks line, but you get my way.
And how genius I was trying to think of it. The Ralph
Abernathy?
No, the fella next door. He was known as the great gate crasher, and he sort of sat them down, and he was a store owner, I believe, in one of the neighboring stores, and he set aside bail money for him. Like, it was very forward. There was a lot of thought put into this, and they knew that they could buy something at the counter. So they bought like a toothbrush and like some other.
Oh, and then sat down at the counter.
Yeah, and that's because there was something very odd about the fact that the thought of being served by a white waitress, that was what they didn't. That was what was thought of as unseemly. What did you say? Like a societal.
Well, I just think that Joe was on his way back from New York and stopped at on a bus and stopped in Washington, and they, as I understand it, and he went to order a hamburger, and they said, you got to go around. It's the same kitchen, but you have to go around to the colored section. And when he got back, and he just got with his buddy, his roommate, and a couple other people, and said, and they were like, yeah, this is malarkey. Let's figure out something there. But I do like and I may not get this just right, but Joe McNeil shared that at one point a gray-haired white woman, walked over, and they're thinking, what she's going to say, and she said, "It's about time." Doesn't that melt you? It's really beautiful. Anyway, there's a lot of innovation in Greensboro.
Yeah.
Social innovation. The modern textile industry was basically, we were if we were dealing with microchips, we would be Silicon Valley. We were textile Greensboro. It was, even though it's all throughout, the world and concentrated in the South, Greensboro was sort of the hub of it. And I could go on and on about the innovation history, about what the Cones did here with their mills, and just a fascinating story of innovation. So we said, okay, there's also a history of education, public and private, and primary and secondary, and all these sort of education things, 5 colleges, universities. So we considered all of that sort of stuff, plus the architectural history. We pretended like the architect that designed the original O. Henry Hotel, Charles Hartman, was here with us. But we were able to use 1998 technology, not 1919 technology that he employed when he built it. So when you look at the shouldered arches, the rustication along the first 2 levels, all of those were things that Hartman did. In fact, the restrooms are complete replicas of what he did the public restrooms at the original Henry. You're able to find pictures of these, Library of Congress and places like that. But he also did the Jefferson Standard Building downtown, Lincoln Financial. And the restrooms there still have some of the original tile and all that, so we studied that. And so Don Reeves was our real leader with this sort of thinking, the person I mentioned earlier that I've learned so much from. We dedicated the Cloister Garden to him after he died. And just while I'm sharing about all that, we were able to bring that. We just ended up, it's just sort of like, wow, how did I luck out to have people like Don Reeves, Chip Calloway, Mike Weaver supporting me, Nancy, I just had this sort of vortex of wonderful, loving support that completely bought into our intention of creating a community-centered hotel. Wow. And but while I'm on that, I'll share a story. So Don was talking about the first time he had been in one of Hartman's buildings, which was the Jefferson Pilot building, and he was just a kid, and he was with his grandfather to get a haircut. There used to be all kinds of little businesses in the Jefferson Standard Building downtown. So he walked up there, and it was the first time he'd seen a revolving door. So he sort of startled by it, looking at it, and his grandfather said, "Don't worry, son. That door just cuts the crowd into people." Isn't that sweet? It's a good line. So it's about frame of reference, isn't it? So Don had a wonderful frame of reference about Greensboro's architectural history, and he was a scholar around that. He studied at Georgetown and got the history of interior decorative arts, and he was wildly well informed, wildly well traveled, and just wildly fun and funny, and we laughed all the time.
That's fascinating. There's so much,
Yeah, we could keep going. I actually probably need to run pretty soon, though.
Oh, okay. I figured. God, this has been so much fun. Do you have any endeavors from here? I mean, where do you want to go? What do you want to do?
Well, the biggest thing I want to do is the employee stock ownership part of our business is only 9 years old. That's really young. I want, and it had a tremendous, hit with the pandemic and everything. I want to see that grow into something that others will want to emulate, but more importantly than that truly benefit the people that are participants in this plan. It's my dream that if I had stumbled in to Quaintance Weaver when I was 21 years old, I would be 68 and still working there. I want to create an environment that, for economic reasons or ego reasons and all the sort of career things that drive people, that we would be sort of the employment place of choice of people that are dedicated, restaurant and hotel folk, and so we want to neutralize the disadvantage of saying, oh, I want to go start my own business, because if you come in and stick with it over a period of time, I mean, it's hard to do something that you could promise was accurate. But I studied that if I had started here when I was 21 years old and had been here for this time, the amount of money that I have access to, that the wealth that Nancy and I have acquired, which isn't significant, but it's significant to someone that grew up, in Darby, Montana, in a mobile home, would be comparable or maybe even greater. Wow. Through that system.
It makes me think,
It's about time, how long you stick with it.
There you go, because I was thinking nobody really stays, the turnover rate in not just but any business is significant compared to
But they have reasons to leave. Maybe we give them reasons not to leave. Not just economic reasons, because you don't want too much of a golden handcuff. You want people to be volitional. In other words, you stay here because it's in your best interest. I encourage everyone I work with to, every 3 years, to psychologically leave. Say, okay, I'm going to go do something else. Come up with at least 2 other ideas of things. So you're choosing between 3 things that you could see yourself really being enthusiastic about. Get to where you're literally comfortable with all 3 of them, and then decide. Because then you're choosing between good and good. Because if you're choosing between good and bad, or risk and no risk, that kind of stuff, you got to neutralize it. Only be here if you want to be here. If you don't want to be here, then leave. But candidly, leave at a time, kind of replace yourself. Don't just sort of say, screw you guys, I'm going to leave you in a lurch. Be responsible with it, but leave. It's fine. This is America. You're a volunteer. If you have the ability to volunteer, only volunteer enthusiastically. Volunteering cynically, or because it's just like financially in your best interest, is a shallow way to live your life. That's what I believe.